Members of the public are advised that our meetings are live streamed by the Town of Grimsby. Individuals and media may be audibly and or visually recorded during the meeting. As a reminder, all electronic devices are to be in silent mode during the open house. Before we begin, I would like to provide the land acknowledgement. Niagara Region and Grimsby are situated on treaty land. This land is steeped in the rich history of First Nations, such as the Hattaway-Wendoronk, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe, including the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. There are many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people from across Turtle Island that live and work in Niagara today. The Regional Municipality of Niagara and the Town of Grimsby stand with all Indigenous peoples, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. The basic premise of this open house is to provide the opportunity for the public to provide input on the proposed application. I would like to stress that there have been no decisions or recommendations made by council or planning staff on these applications. To ensure a fair process, members of council are to hear public input, but not to engage in debate about the merits of the application. Opinions on the application should not be made at this time. Members will have the opportunity to express all their views and concerns when the final staff report and recommendation comes forward. A subsequent public meeting will be held at a later date in accordance with the requirements of the Planning Act, and public engagement will be welcome then as well. This meeting is conducted in accordance with the town's procedural bylaw. All participants are asked to conduct themselves with decorum and respect and provide the opportunity for all members of the public to express their opinion in an environment of tolerance on all points of view and free of intimidation. The intent is to create a venue to encourage people to participate in the process and provide their inputs. With us this evening is Dave Aston and Aaliyah Clark, MHBC Planning. Planning staff in attendance are Walter Basic, Deputy Director of Planning, and Michaela Bray, Planner. Tonight we'll start with staff providing a brief presentation outlining the process and the application. Next, the MHBC Planning Consultant team will provide an overview of the proposal, and that will be followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you have not already done so, please ensure you have signed in so you will be informed of future meetings on this proposal. As we navigate the hybrid open house meeting, we asked all participants for your patience. Each participant will be called in order and will be provided 10 minutes to speak. Each presenter may speak only once. If you hear your comment presented by someone else, please do not duplicate the remarks. All the comments are being recorded and will be taken into consideration. When you are called, we ask you to state your name and address. Persons addressing council should confine their remarks to the business at hand and shall direct their comments or questions to the chair. Staff are taking notes of all the questions asked this evening. At the end of the delegations, the consultants from MHBC Planning will be asked to respond to all the questions and comments raised. If you feel that your questions have not been responded to this evening, you can email our planning department at planning@grimsby.ca. Welcome, Michaela, for your presentation. Good evening.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. All right. Good evening, Mayor Jordan, members of council, and members of the public. Welcome again to the open house for the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment applications for 37 Bartlett Avenue. Again, my name is Michaela Bray, and I'm a planner with the town of Grimsby. Next slide, please. Tonight, I'll be presenting an overview of the processes behind the application. Following a presentation from the consultants at MHBC Planning will be made, providing details about the proposal. After, we welcome input from members of the public when you are called upon by Mayor Jordan. Councillors will also have the opportunity to ask questions. All questions will be recorded by town planning and MHBC staff and will be answered once all delegates have had the opportunity to speak. Next slide, please. The purpose of tonight's meeting is to provide an overview of the planning process and how you can get involved, to provide an overview of the policy and regulatory framework, rules, and regulations, to provide information and details about the proposal, and to answer your questions and for you to provide your feedback. Next slide, please. The Planning Act provides authority for for an applicant to submit an application for a development proposal that does not currently meet the official plan and zoning bylaw policy. The town is then required to process these applications. The official plan and zoning bylaw can only be amended if it's determined that these proposed changes comply with the overall intent of the official plan and result in development that is compatible with the surrounding neighborhoods. Next slide, please. This flowchart shows an overview of the planning process. It begins with a pre-consultation meeting with the applicants, town staff, and any relevant agencies. For example, this can include the Escarpment Commission, Niagara Region Conservation Authority. And this is to determine the required submission materials to support the official application. The pre-consultation meeting for 37 Bartlett Avenue took place in May 2021. Once the applicant has compiled the required submission materials and fees to the town, it is reviewed for completion. This application was deemed complete in June 2022. Once deemed complete, a notice of the application is sent out asking for agencies to review and to provide comment. At or around the same time, an open house meeting is scheduled. And then multiple resubmissions of the application may be required from the applicant to incorporate any of the agency or public comments that were received. So in the future, there'll be a statutory public meeting that is then held once these agency and public comments have been incorporated. Public meeting provides another opportunity for members of the public to provide their input. Once the public meeting is over, the planning staff will prepare a recommendation report to council to aid in their decision. And a decision on the application is made by council at a future council meeting. There would then be the opportunity to appeal the decision afterwards. And to note, after this process, the applicant will have to undergo a site plan approval application, which would capture more of the details of the project, including elements such as site grading, building design, and landscaping. Next slide, please. Planning is a public process and encourages the participation of the members of the public. This open house is one such opportunity to provide your feedback on the application. Other participation options include submitting a letter to the planning department. This can be done also by email to planning@grimsby.ca. You can also send a copy of your letter to your ward councillor. And members of the public are welcome to provide comment up until the point that the staff recommendation report is prepared. Next slide, please. To stay informed about the application, you are invited to provide your mailing address to the planning department. By doing so, you will receive notice of future meetings, information on the staff recommendation report, information about speaking in front of council, and information on how the decision can be appealed. Next slide, please. Moving on to the proposed development at 37 Bartlett Avenue. I'll just provide a brief overview here, and then the consultant from MHVC Planning will go more in depth on the proposal. So this slide shows the proposed site plan here. And to note, there are 3 parts to the subject lands, and the development is only proposed to occur on parts 1 and part 2. And these 2 parts are located outside of the escarpment development control area. Next slide, please. This shows a rendering of the proposed development. The proposal includes 4 stacked townhouse buildings, which would total to 116 residential units. Townhouses would be accessed from a private road off of Bartlett Avenue. Parking would be provided at grade as well as underground and includes accessible spaces. Common amenity space will be in the form of a children's playground, and private amenity space would be as balconies or rooftop terraces, depending on the unit. Next slide, please. Just to go over the official plan, currently the site is has the land use designation of low density residential in the area of the proposed development. The application proposes to redesignate by amending the official plan to a medium density residential area that permits townhouse dwellings. The lands that are designated environmental protection, escarpment natural, escarpment conservation, as well as the hazard overlay will all remain. Next slide, please. And then a brief overview of the zoning bylaw. Right now, the current zoning of the subject lands is residential detached 1, also known as RD1. The applicant proposes to rezone the subject lands to a residential multiple 1, also known as an RM1 zone, and it would be modified. The RM1 zone permits stacked townhouse dwellings, and the modification that is proposed by the applicant is to not allow any parking lot within 1 meter of a property line abutting a residential zone. And just to note, the zoned lands in part 3, so that part that doesn't have development proposed on it mentioned earlier, those zones of the escarpment development control area, as well as the environmental protection overlay, environmental conservation overlay, are all to remain as is. Next slide, please. And we'll now hear from the applicants from MHBC Planning. Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Up next, we have Dave Ashton and Aaliyah Clark from MHBC. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor Jordan, councilors, staff, and other members of the public. I'm Dave Ashton, and Leah Clark is with me this evening from MHBC. We're here on behalf of the landowners and applicants this evening. Just want to say thank you to Michaela for her overview presentation. Covered off a lot of what's being proposed. What we're going to do this evening is share just some additional information on some of the images and some of the background information that was considered and submitted as part of the complete application to the town. We recognize the purpose of the open house tonight is to obtain feedback on what's being submitted. And there's opportunity for further discussion and review in coordination with the town and agencies following this evening and following all agency and town staff comments being received. So tonight we're here to share what's been proposed and then to listen to comments and where we can, I guess later this evening, to provide responses or answers to questions that may arise through the open house. Next slide, please. So the site, as mentioned, is currently at the extent of where Bartlett Ave is constructed. We are aware of the plans for Bartlett Avenue extension as it relates to the potential for that to occur to the south. The lands have an area of 2.39 hectares or just under 6 acres, previously used for agricultural operation or orchard and single detached dwelling, and occupied now with a single detached dwelling and accessory building on the site. Next slide. Just in context of the surrounding area, and you can see the subject lands here, the Niagara Escarpment natural areas identified in the green, Bartlett Ave to along the west edge, and then to the north, the intersection of Bartlett Avenue and Main Street. And we recognize that there's a mix of residential uses within the surrounding area and certainly within the immediate area, a range of different housing types with varying heights. At the intersection of Main Street and Bartlett Avenue, there's neighborhood commercial. And then to the north, there's high density development and medium density development. So there is a mix within the surrounding area, and there's access to existing parks within the area. And as I mentioned, the Niagara Escarpment to the south. Next slide, please. So the proposal, as provided by an overview by Michaela, is 4 stacked townhouse dwelling blocks of 116 residential dwelling units. There's a new access proposed to Bartlett Avenue, which would be an improved connection from what's the existing driveway to the property. You can see the blue and the black or green dashed lines. Those lines represent all of the natural features and the buffers that were delineated through environmental study and field work with the Conservation Authority and regional staff. So those limits have been reviewed and confirmed in the field, and the buffers are recommended through the environmental study. So the limit of development is based on confirmation from the necessary agencies to determine the limits of natural features. The buildings are oriented to the interior surface parking area, with the majority of the parking being underground, and the buildings are separated from adjacent rear yards through landscaping and surface parking area. And as mentioned, there is an area where there's a proposed reduction for the laneway itself and associated parking to the adjacent residential uses. Next slide. So this just really a bird's eye view or rendering of the development proposal from the site plan to what it would look like. The majority of the parking will be underground. The underground parking will be kind of designed through details at the site plan. What we understand at this point, based on geotechnical information and boreholes, is that from the surface to groundwater, there's approximately 2.5 to 4 meters difference across the site. So based on that information, currently there's sufficient depth to groundwater for the underground parking to be considered. Again, that would be more of a detailed design moving forward. There's landscaping provided throughout the site. There will be additional planting within the buffer areas adjacent to those natural features. And there'll be sidewalk connections throughout the site and to Bartlett Avenue. Next slide. This is just a view from Bartlett Avenue. And the intent here to have an enhanced elevation to Bartlett Avenue, but not the primary entrances onto Bartlett Avenue, so that there's no access. One of the items that the region has identified is the need for a fence along Bartlett Avenue, and that is something that will need to be considered in any consideration of a final bylaw. So there's opportunity for landscaping along Bartlett Avenue. The mass is proposed to be broken up, and then additional details associated with noise and fencing would be addressed through future site plan approvals. Next slide. This is looking at the interior to the site. So as you come off of Bartlett Avenue into the site, this would be the internal driveway or laneway with the surface parking, and then access to the parking garage just kind of to the top part of the image, or the south part of the lands. And there will be balconies facing internal to the street on the second level, and then potentially on the rooftop level as well. And what I would say is these renderings illustrate the current design thinking. There may be other opportunities to look at the design and location of amenities in context of the proposed buildings and the orientation, but this is a reflection of the current design thinking. Next slide. As was identified, there are two applications being considered: an official plan amendment to redesignate the land's medium density residential area to permit a 3.5-story building height, and then the proposed zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the land's RM1, which is similar to the adjacent zoning for the townhouses, but to add a site-specific provision of a 1 meter setback from a property for a parking area abutting a residential zone. Next slide. With regard to provincial and regional policy, these are documents that need to be considered in context of land use planning decisions. Just in general, the provincial policy statement and the growth management plan speak to growth and development and intensification within built-up areas, providing a range and mix of housing types to meet current and future demands of residents. The growth plan establishes a minimum target for residential development within a built-up area and looks to the creation of complete communities within Niagara region and within the town of Grimsby. The region, just within the last couple of weeks, has adopted a new regional official plan, and the regional official plan has established a minimum intensification target for the town of Grimsby for 98%. So that is greater than the growth plan, but reflects the need to accommodate growth and development in the town within the built-up area. Next slide. I won't cover too much of this. Michaela covered off the official plan current designations. The low density residential is being proposed to change. There are no changes being proposed to the environmental protection area and escarpment natural area. The zoning bylaw again will be amended to the RM1 to allow for the type of stacked townhouses that are being proposed with that site-specific provision as previously mentioned. The natural areas associated with the escarpment and associated with the water feature to the east portion of the lands will also be zoned environmental conservation and hazard area. Next slide. As part of the pre-application review, the town and agencies provide what is required for a complete application to be submitted for consideration. This list identifies those that were identified and that were submitted for complete application. Planning report, environmental impact study, which identified and delineated the natural features and recommended buffers, and also completed an impact analysis of the proposed development. Functional servicing and stormwater management report, which looked at the servicing strategy for the lands and consideration associated with stormwater management. A geotechnical study that looked at the soils and slope stability associated with the water feature and the Niagara escarpment. Environmental site assessments looking at the soils conditions, a tree preservation plan, urban design brief, which included streetscape elevations, a fire route plan, and then a survey just to confirm the boundary limits. All of these studies, as mentioned, are available for review on the town's website. Next slide. This is just an image from the preliminary grading and servicing report. Just a high-level comment here with regard to stormwater management. There's really a combined approach being proposed where the majority of the flows will be directed to the Bartlett Avenue stormwater system. There'll be a underground storage tank that will manage flows up to the 100-year storm. And then there may also be a combined approach where overland flow may occur as in its existing condition within the existing water course to the east, but that would be only in a major storm overland requirement. Otherwise, the intent is to manage through the on-site storage tank and outlet to the storm sewer within Bartlett Avenue. So that is something that, again, is under review. There were discussions in preparation of the stormwater management report and servicing reports with town staff. So there's been quite a bit of back and forth and information sharing associated with the lands and adjacent lands to the north, and details associated with the proposal continues to be under review from the town, and comments were received from the region in a way that additional detail would be required at the time of site plan approval. Next slide, please. This is just the image from the tree management plan, simply just to identify that trees shown in red are for removal, so primarily trees that are internal or that were identified as hazardous within the site. Any boundary trees or trees within the environmental areas are being proposed to be retained, and those would be protected by tree protection fencing that would be considered at the time of a site plan application. Next slide. I think just in conclusion, it's our opinion in reviewing the policies that there's consistency and conformity with provincial direction. The lands provide opportunity for intensification in the built-up area that is really in proximity to other mix of uses within the area and public amenities. There's consideration for compatibility associated with adjacent lands. It provides an alternative housing form in the community. There's single detached townhouses, apartments generally within the surrounding area. This would be a new form that would be proposed. The lands and proposed development can be adequately serviced by existing infrastructure. And we received regional comments on the application, and regional comment have no objection to the proposal. They do have comments that need to be dealt with through further detailed design, but had no objection to the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications. And that's my presentation for this evening. Again, happy to be back to respond to any questions or any points of clarification through comments that arise through the open house.
All right, thank you for your presentation, Dave. Now we will open up to members of the public, so I'll call the delegations in order. First up, we have John Derkinderden. John, welcome. I don't see John, so I'll move to the second one. Guy and Mary Jelena.
Is it possible to change the order, sir? I'd like to...
Yes, I can put you at the end. I'll put you in Ron's position then if Ron wants to go earlier. So welcome, Ron. Good evening.
This proposal. I'll start by saying I'm in total opposition to the current proposal. We understand that development and growth is a given in a growing town. This growth, though, needs to be responsible growth and with respect to the characteristics of our town and a given neighborhood, to the unique concerns in the area and the residents living in it. Those that purchased homes in the area invested 15, 20 plus years in their lives and life savings in our neighborhood and need to be listened to and our opinions respected. We are a large group of residents taking pride in our properties and loving the unique characteristics of our own streets and the adjacent streets around us. There's a very unique look and feel to our quiet mainly retirement neighborhood. All in the neighborhood agree this feel will no longer exist, and we will lose the character of our area with the placement of 116 townhouses and close to 300 people, 174 cars existing in the area where one home now exists. There's no plan for parking other than the 1.5 parking spaces in their compound. Where the extra cars go, as I don't know many families with 1.5 cars. There's no parking allowed on Bartlett. The proposed development residents will have to fill existing side streets for overflow parking and then create shortcuts to back access entrances. There will be a constant conflict with space issues with current residents, congestion, and noise in the area. With this proposal, there will be no sound deadening green space or transition for those of us bordering on the development. We will basically be next to an asphalt and concrete compound with close to 200 cars coming and going at all hours of the day and night. Sound and light pollution will be something totally out of character for our existing neighborhood with noise level and commotion of 300 people to scare all nature from the peaceful solitude of the current area. There's also the concern of rising crime rate, as we have seen with the intensification and high percentage investment rental condo units in the Casablanca area. If we look at the proposal planning justification report, it inaccurately describes the abutting residential uses as being 2 and 2.5 story height homes. They're actually 99% single-story bungalows, single-family homes with only one unit at 1.5 floors. Will the proposal be corrected and submitted with accurate representation of the current adjacent properties? They also inaccurately portrayed them as, in these renderings, as multiple stories as well. With the Town of Grimsby plan, it currently does not have 37 Bartlett as an area for intensification on Grimsby Schedule A. Also, the official plan also does not envision the subject lands to be appropriate for medium density residential development, or it would be designated for that in Schedule B. Has something changed that would make this a viable proposal? Trying to change this area from an R1 zone, low density, to medium density, I believe, is a developer looking to exploit the lands and cash in on the property at the detriment of the existing adjacent owners. They were totally aware of the zoning when they purchased the property, and it was priced accordingly. Our homes were also priced, valued according to R1 designated neighborhood. They also want to change a 3-meter rule for distance to a parking lot to a residential property line. On a personal note, this is directly on my fence line, which I'm totally against. You will also notice that this isn't depicted and rendered in their drawings accurately. They show a green space about the length of 12 feet in that abutting area. These 3.5-story rooftop patios will look directly down into our backyards from 40 feet away. As you are aware, directly adjacent properties constantly have to deal with the issues of flooding, mud and debris washing down from the escarpment. We deal with ongoing creek maintenance and emergency management. In regards to the runoff which flows down the escarpment through the proposal property and then in front of our houses here on 8 Muscat Drive. I live directly facing the area of the very large graded concrete culvert input where the water has to go underground or flood over the banks. It's a constant issue for the Town of Grimsby Maintenance Department. We constantly have heavy equipment working to clear branches, debris from the drains, every heavy rain or warning of heavy rains. If not constantly cleared, the water backs up and flows with mud and debris like a river, full width of our street and down to the other streets below. These pieces of heavy equipment are damaging and shortening the life of our road and curbs. We, the residents of 8 Muscat, own the street and curbs and are responsible for the cost of replacement. We have voiced our concerns multiple times to the town regarding the damage being done by this heavy equipment that's trying to manage an already bad water management engineering plan. Can we, the residents, get in writing from the town that they will be financially responsible to the residents if the flooding and damages are intensified with any allowed development in this highly flood-sensitive area? I'm concerned with any disturbance, land coverage, deep excavation for underground parking, along with changing the natural water table between us and the escarpment will only cause more problems with the runoff area. I'm also curious if there are any other developments that have been approved with a single exit entrance for 116 homes. To the planning department, is the Bartlett extension no longer in the plan? Does it make sense to border a truck route with condominiums right at the edge? Also a single drive entrance and exit to a 4-lane truck route. The reason the town wanted to move the traffic from our downtown mountain access is due to density in the area. If we intensify the housing on Bartlett, does this not create the same issue, making it even worse due to the high density of housing and 300-plus residents with their only sidewalk access being a designated truck route? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ron. Now we'll move next to Phil and Margot Thompson. Good evening. All right, I don't see Phil or Margot. Oh, there.
Yeah, we're here.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah,
All right, thank you.
We're coming in by Zoom.
Just takes a minute to get set up here. Okay, now, there's several of the points were made, but I'm going to read this anyway because I've got it all written out and I can't parse it out at this point. There's a motion in the plan of wrong page, of course. Okay, we are here to address the application to change the bylaw for number 37 Bartlett Avenue from single-family dwelling to multi-family dwellings. We have several concerns. With regard to this application. Has Bartlett not been designated as a future truck route down the escarpment due to, in part, to its lack of residential dwellings? If so, the process has already started for building 4 dwellings on the west side of Bartlett. Now the application is being made to build 116 multifamily units on the east side of Bartlett. Assuming each of these units would have 2 adults and 2 children, if not more, the increase in residents would be estimated at between 300 and 400. We were previously informed that the truck route would be coming over from Park Road at the base of the escarpment. This would put this development on the outer corner of said route, and knowing the speed at which the trucks travel down the escarpment would create a danger from lack of agility to negotiate the curve. Since this development would increase the number of residents exponentially on this road, it would be more residential than any other escarpment truck route in the Niagara Peninsula. And there is also mention in this development plan of a children's playground adjacent to a truck route. Please note that the children's play area, as shown on the provided plan, is adjacent to Bartlett, just north of where the curve would be to straighten out to cross over to Main Street. This area is also plagued with flooding and heavy runoff after heavy rainfall and melting snow. It is forecasted that these heavy storms are going to be increasing with global warming. Now a developer wants to change the whole landscape and structure at the base of the escarpment by removing trees, changing the grade, putting in not only a brick and mortar structure, but also asphalt paving and an underground parking garage. What about the water table? Well, okay, that was commented on. And stormwater runoff. What provisions are contemplated for flooding in the underground garage, as this whole area has a flooding issue for years? What about parking? Does the town really think 1.5 parking spaces per unit are adequate? Total 174 for 116 units, and 9 of those will be accessible. I would think that every unit would have at least 1 car. That leaves only half the units allowed to have parking for a second car. I mean, we had 3 cars for a little while. Now we're down to 2. What measures? If the residents of this area find that parking spaces are inadequate and start using their surrounding streets, Vintners Lane will not accommodate them, as there are no legal spots on Vintners Lane south of Muscat Drive. Clearance from their driveways must be 1.5 meters, and so there's no parking spots available. Parking is currently not permitted on Bartlett. Muscat Drive is currently used by staff and overflow parking for the mini mall at Bartlett, Maine. I'm sure that it is also being used by new doctors and pharmacy at Bartlett, Maine. Has there been any discussion on visitor and or overflow parking? Okay, now actual questions. What safety measures do you have in mind to prevent vehicular traffic, truck traffic, from damaging property and or children playing close to the roadway? What accommodation will be provided for visitor overflow parking? Where will snow be piled in the winter? This will decrease the number of available parking spaces. What accommodation will be made for melting snow runoff? And what measures are you going to put in place to accommodate storm runoff? I know I saw the part there about the storm runoff report, so I'm going to have to read that. This development is in the Niagara Escarpment Commission. Okay, there was a comment that this was not in the Niagara Escarpment Commission, but according to the web page, the map that they provide, this area is in the Niagara Escarpment Commission urban area classification, town of Grimsby. Has the commission been contacted regarding this development? This development, although classified as urban, still needs to meet conditions as laid out by the NEC. Specifically, section 1.7.5, development objectives. Growth and subsection 9, growth and development in urban areas shall be compatible with and provide for, and then I was specifically interested in subsection G, compliance with the targets, criteria, and recommendations of applicable water, wastewater, stormwater master plans, approved watershed planning, and or sub-watershed plan in land use planning. And that's all I have for this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments, Phil and Margot. Up next, we have Troy Farncombe. Good evening, Troy.
Good evening. Thank you very much for the opportunity to respond to the proposal. First of all, I want to mention that the proposal itself, the notification was proposal, was not very well publicized. Up until a recent page in the Niagara newspaper, the outside billboard was placed in an inaccessible location on a dead-end street, requiring transit through a dangerous and restricted construction zone to actually view that billboard. So it was almost impossible to see that billboard. That aside, the total land size as mentioned is 2.38 hectares, providing a density of 49 units per hectare, although it was acknowledged that only 0.9 hectares of the land is developable. This leads to a density of actually 129 units per hectare. So current zoning low density residential permits a maximum of 25 units per hectare, which is typical of semi-detached or attached townhomes. So the actual changes to this to 129 units per hectare represent a 5 times increase in density compared to a typical townhome density and 10 times that of a fully detached home. Just for comparison's sake, the existing single detached housing on Golfwoods Drive is 12.6 units per hectare. So this is a 10 times increase in density compared to the single detached homes on Golfwoods. The existing townhomes on Vineyards Lane have a density of 19.5 units per hectare. Again, more than 5 times less density than this proposed development. The renderings of the homes, the buildings, and the design descriptions appear to depict 3-story attached townhouses, leading one to believe that each townhouse is actually 3 stories. However, this cannot be true given that there are between 28 and 32 units per block. This means that each floor of the block is a separate unit. This is not a townhouse. These are condominiums, and these are very small condominiums at that. So these are on the order of 800 square feet, 1-bedroom condominiums. So these are not townhomes in the sense of a townhome. No description of the actual units is actually provided in any of the documentation. So we have no idea if these are all 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom studios. We have no idea, except just on the space that they're allotted, they can only be small. They're also regarded as being 3.5 stories tall, but in fact, they're 4.5 stories tall. So there's a half a story in the basement that's unaccounted for. There's a full story on the roof that's unaccounted for. So these are 4.5 story buildings, not 3.5 story buildings. The renderings also depict stairway entrances with only 4 doors, when in fact 8 doors are present at each stairway entrance. That's an eyesore to look at 8 doors to 8 different units times 6 different entrances on each building. You're looking at 32 doors on the front of the building. That's all you're going to see on these buildings. It's terrible design. Throughout the design brief, there's an emphasis on the ability to maintain walkable distance and that it will, quote, will allow residents to walk to nearby public and commercial amenities. As a resident of this area on Golfwoods Drive, these areas do not exist. There are no amenities around this area. There are no restaurants or commercial shopping areas in this area. There are 2 dentists, a doctor's office, and a foot care clinic in the vicinity. That's all. It is not walkable to other amenities. There is no public transportation available, and there will not be any public transportation available in Grimsby in the foreseeable future. The tree preservation plan has an incorrect address on it, listing it as Highway 56 in Hamilton, leading me to believe that the entire tree preservation report is not applicable to the proposal to the property under consideration. So we can throw that entire document away because it's essentially useless. Overall, the environmental considerations are laughable, suggesting that bike racks, low-flow toilets, insulated windows, and LED lighting are appropriate green initiatives for the massive environmental damage that will occur as a result of developing an underground parking garage for 150 cars and 4 massive apartment buildings adjacent to protected escarpment lands. One of the design goals was to, quote, create a development that incorporates sustainable design principles and techniques. None of these things were mentioned in any of the documentation provided. In closing, the proposed development of 116 stacked units in a block of 4 4.5-story buildings is unjustified and does not fit the character of East Main Street, Grimsby, as a single-family detached residential area. The developers have presented a biased and very misleading proposal to get the bylaws changed to accommodate them, and this is not in the best interest of Grimsby to approve these requests. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Troy. Up next, we have Anna and Raymond Fragapani.
I'm here.
Oh,
Raymond will not be attending, he's attending by Zoom. I don't have anything to add to what my neighbor already has said.
okay, great. Thank you very much, Anna. Up next, we have Ingvar Grimsmo.
I'm here as well.
Ingvar?
I trust my trusted neighbors are covering my comments.
All right, that'll be so noted. Up next, we have Sylvie Lumiere. La Lumiere, so, sorry.
She is also attending on Zoom.
All right.
She probably has comments like that.
All right, perfect. And Ray Parks is not. Sylvie, would you like to speak?
No, all my comments have been mentioned, and I agree with Ron's proposal and Troy, very nicely put together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sylvie. Up next, we have Ari Berendreit. Stan and Allison Clinch. Up next, we have Vinod Baga. Vinod, are you there? Okay, we'll move to Anthony Takach.
Here.
Good evening, Anthony. Welcome to the podium.
Thank you. As you know, my name, and we know most everybody's name here, but somebody else important is missing from this, and that is, in the name of transparency and ethical consumerism, who is the actual owner of this? We know some representatives of them, but we don't know actually who owns the property and who's taking care of this initiative. I think the future residents would likely want to know where their rent money is going to be going. That was one question. The other question is that the reports state that Main Street is an identified bicycle route. However, it does not have any bicycle lanes in the area, and I've noticed on quite a few occasions that vehicles have to maneuver around the bicycles and cross the lane, and that's unsafe for the vehicles and for the cyclists. And also, there are no grocery stores, as somebody else mentioned, in the area, so walking or riding a bicycle is really not viable for a lot of people. So my question is, will Main Street be fitted with bicycle lanes in time for the opening of this complex? Another point is that it's going to be fairly high density with a lot of people crammed into a small spot, and for the sanity of the residents, will the floors and walls be made out of concrete for soundproofing? Another point is in the last few years, we've noticed that there's been a lot of attention given to contagious infectious diseases, and that there are cases around the world where entire apartment blocks have been locked down because a few residents tested positive. So my question is this really the best time to be installing high-density housing in any community, actually? And my last point is the whole plan of this apartment complex really was designed by its top-down planning of the United States Environmental Protection Agency called the Smart Growth Principles. And you'll so notice that a lot of the ideas in the reports, in the plan, have been copy and pasted right from there. There's nothing to do with the region, I don't believe, and this is coming from outside of our country. In that light, to go along with that, one of the things they talk about is reducing traffic, saving the climate and whatnot. But my question would be, will each of the parking spots inside the unit have high current charger ports for all the electric cars? And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Up next, we have Guy and Mary Jelena. Okay, Guy. I'm a Montreal Canadiens fan, so I get it.
All right. There you go. Okay, further to the comments expressed earlier this evening by previous delegations, I'd like to answer the following questions for the record and responses. Some of them, I think most of them would be directly to the town of Grimsby, but hopefully that's appropriate, so let's go with this. Number one, has the town of Grimsby updated their official plan, and if not, will the proposed application be assessed against the new official plan, or will the MHBC be required to update their justification report to conform to the newly adopted Niagara official plan? Another question is, in reference to the town of Grimsby current plan, we believe this application is premature until the town undertakes secondary planning for this neighborhood to identify where there are areas for infill. Will this be undertaken by the town prior to any approval? Will the town freeze this application until secondary planning for this neighborhood is completed? We feel this plan was submitted based on outdated information. The planning justification report inaccurately the planning justification report inaccurately describes the abutting residential use as being 2 to 2.5 stories in height. They are actually 2 stories in height, and there's only really 1 out of 8 units that are really, most of them are bungalows. Will this report be corrected to reflect this inaccuracy and also considered in the decision? The proposed unit have rooftop patios and are 3.5 stories high. We believe this does not respect the scale and build form of surrounding neighborhood as per section 3.4 and 3.47 of Town of Grimsby Plan. Will the town take this fact into consideration? Additional question regarding residential neighborhoods compatibility have been submitted in writing by Ron Lane. And some of the key questions are, and this is referring to the Niagara official plan, per section 3.47.4, I guess, compatibility criteria states, New built dwelling within stable residential neighborhoods shall provide a consistent relationship with existing adjacent housing forms and the arrangement of these existing houses on their lot. As such, new dwellings shall provide a building height which reflects the pattern of heights of adjacent housing. The proposed development does not provide a building height that reflects the pattern of heights of adjacent housing. Adjacent housing is only 1 to 2 stories in height. There are only 2-story building on Muscat Drive, which is a little further out. The proposed building heights are 3.5 stories. What is the town position on this issue? And let me see here. The applicant is proposing to establish a new medium-density residential designation on the property within a stable residential neighborhood. However, the proposed development does not meet the criteria in 3.4.7 in terms of patterns of height, massing, and lot average. Again, will the town consider this issue or this point? The application states, the development incorporates a transition area of single detached lots which meets the requirements of subsection D and E. The proposed townhouse development does not incorporate a transition area of single detached lots. What is the town's position on this as well? I think that's it.
Great, thank you very much, Guy.
Thank you.
Up next, we have Larry Crockford. I don't see Larry, so now we'll move to members of council. Oh, okay, Larry, you're there? Welcome.
Hello, yes. How are you guys tonight?
We are well, so you can go ahead. Yeah, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I just wanted to reiterate that most of my points have been covered as well. I mean, there is a pollution factor as well, because I live adjacent to the property above. So an extra 116 units is it's a bit of an issue for me as well. I mean, I know I'm just a single piece of property up here, but we are looking down on one single dwelling, and now we're going to look down on a potential of 116 units. Our property value and noise, trespassing, property value again, truck route. I mean, these are all issues that have been covered. I just want to reiterate them. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Larry. That is the end of the delegates, so now I'll open up to members of council for any questions, comments, or concerns. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. So I do have some questions. It's kind of a list, but I'll ask them. So I know it was said, but what is the current official plan use here? I think that it was low density.
It's RD1.
RD1 is the zoning. The official plan is low density, I think. So the zoning's RD1, and they're proposing RM1. The M is for multiple. Is that correct? Okay. So the question I have, where else in Grimsby has this type of development been allowed? Like, they call it a 2-story townhouse, but it reminds me, the shape of it doesn't look much like a townhouse. I mean, I've seen townhouses, and this looks to me more like lake house development on Esplanade. It's also 4 stories. I think that the units in there are only single-story units. They're 1 and 2 bedrooms, and this, I guess, is probably 2-story units, 2 and 3 bedrooms. But the look of the building looks a lot more like the lake house development on Esplanade down at Grimsby on the lake. So I wonder, is that the only area where this has been allowed, or where else has this been allowed in Grimsby?
Are we going to answer the questions now or at the end? So it's up now?
Yeah.
All right, Walter, are you prepared to answer now then?
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Mayor. Specifically the question, where has it been allowed previously? You mentioned the Esplanade, those are townhouse units, but the similarity is there is a rooftop amenity on the Esplanade units. Another similar project to this where units are stacked on top of each other is on the corner of Robinson Street and John Street. That was just recently completed, probably in the last 3-4 years.
Okay, so those ones, Robinson and John, that is in the downtown intensification area. And I think it was Brownfield, that was the old HVAC place downtown. I think they did quite a bit of site remediation. And then Bright Developments, that was Paul Beresia. He built some two-story townhouses, and they didn't look as much like the Lake House. They do have rooftop amenity. Do they have underground parking? No. But this one does, and Lake House does. And, but Bright Developments on John Street doesn't have underground parking. I think they have garages inside the units. Because I remember we approved some of them, and they're in the downtown intensification area. So I think that's different, but it's something I would note. So then, when they say the regional plan wants 98% intensification, that means like 98% of our growth needs to be in a built-up area. It doesn't mean that the built-up areas need to receive 98, like, they don't, can someone explain to me what 98% intensification means?
I can offer an explanation. Again, I think your initial answer to your question was correct. It means that 98% of development within Grimsby is to be targeted to be within the built-up area.
Okay, because I thought that I was right there, but the way
So sorry to interrupt, but just a point of clarification, just before we move any further, because this is a public open house, proper procedure is that planning staff and the developer will take back our questions, and they will be answered at a later time. I think at the statutory public meeting, they will be addressed there. So it's really an information night, so rather than have it on the fly.
Yeah, then just a couple more.
All right, so your questions will be definitely noted and
Okay, I
answered.
just have a couple more. The other one was
fulsome.
about the Bartlett extension. How will that affect, so what I heard was that the Bartlett extension would come from Bartlett, but it would actually go up Park Road. And, but I don't know that for sure. But how much do we know about the Bartlett extension? And how will that impact this development? I mean, I know some of the residents have brought it up, but I think that's a real concern. Like, they're going to build a highway up there, or some kind of highway access. And I'm a real proponent. I want to see the Bartlett extension go in. I know it's a lot of money, but how is this going to impact? So, and that's all the questions I have for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. Councillor DeFlavio.
Sorry, my.
There you go. Thanks, Your Worship. Through you, my questions are related to density. I know that our planning staff will usually put this in a matrix, but I'd like to see a comparison of how many units would be allowed under the current rules. Some people brought this up, but I think it should be seen side by side. So I'd like to see a side-by-side comparison of what is currently allowed, because our official plan was not that old, and neither is our zoning bylaw. I'd like to see a response to the town policy regarding transitioning. I'd like to see an update on where as Councillor Sharp already mentioned, on where the Bartlett extension stands, because obviously a completion of Bartlett Avenue and a connection to a transportation route to Smithville will have a significant impact on the decisions made on this land. And you can't, well, I don't want to get into too much of detail, but obviously that would be an important thing to consider when considering how this land is used. The other question I had was regarding the contextual analysis, which is in the report. It mentions properties like Evergreen Terrace and commercial properties on Main Street. I guess my question is, what kind of scope is allowed in a contextual analysis? Should it be just immediately adjacent properties, or are you allowed to pick properties that are half a kilometer away? Because, I mean, putting something into context for me means it should be based on right there in that neighborhood, not something that's on Main Street or on, that is a significant distance away. So those are all things that I'd like to see what is considered context from a planning perspective. So obviously I don't expect answers to those questions now, but if we can see those at the public meeting, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Frake.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this is in Ward 1, so this troubles me a lot. First of all, I am really concerned that we don't know who the owner is. I mean, we're dealing with a ghost here. And I'm concerned that right up front, that the owner or whoever put a sign up on the property which nobody could see. And it was only through the insight of Ron Lane, who contacted me and said this billboard was there, and I had to drive up to see it, because otherwise I would never have known it was happening. So having said all that, there's a lot of concerns about this particular development, and there are more concerns, and you can turn them into questions and reply to them at the next meeting. First of all, there's the water runoff, the water table, the wastewater, water. I mean, water has no conscience. It goes where it wants to go. And I don't care what you build into it. You're not going to build in enough to prevent water from destroying property and the landscape and so on and so forth. I've already experienced this with another house, which is off Gulfwoods, which was noted earlier, where they were allowed to build a house on the side of the escarpment, and it's created nothing but havoc and a lot of problems with water runoff, and I think Mr. Lane might have been one of the recipients of that water coming into his yard. It intrudes, for sure, on every resident who backs onto the property. We're not talking about bungalows here, we're talking about stacked townhouses, 3 of them, with underground parking. So that's a huge concern. The traffic, we've got new traffic coming on stream from Branthaven. Sorry, did someone say something? And the traffic along Main Street is already a little bit of an issue, I shouldn't say a little bit, it's a big bit of an issue. This is only going to create more at an intersection which is already very, very busy. It takes traffic off the QEW that comes into town and goes in different directions, and this is just going to create even more. I have a real concern about that. The proximity to the retirement homes, again, the traffic will definitely interfere with that. There's, my list goes on, but anyways, I'll allow others to have a word, but this particular piece of property is not zoned for this particular development. It never was, so what always surprises me why developers buy up property that's not zoned for what they want to build. And they come in with this highfalutin idea of building something that's 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 times the size of what it should be in terms of a population and intensity. I don't get it. So this is an issue for me, and it's an issue for the residents, that's for sure. So I'll leave it at that for now. So these are all questions and concerns I'd like to address. I'd like to have the developer address at the next meeting. So anyways, this doesn't look good, and it certainly falls out of perspective to what we want in this particular town, in that area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Vardy.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Mayor. I guess I have to say right off the top, I share all of Councillor Frake's concerns. I again do not understand why developers purchase properties knowing what the zoning is and then try to ram down our throats a different kind of zoning. That's just, to my mind, it's not fair and it's not right, and it doesn't respect the residents that live in Grimsby. So when I look at this development, I'm thinking it's like trying to put a size 10 foot into a size 5 shoe. It just doesn't fit. So some specific questions I have, and I don't want to repeat what some of the others have said, but you know, I'm having a hard time kind of visualizing these stacked townhouses. I mean, to me, as Councillor Sharp said, they look like condominiums. So like how many units are stacked upon each other? So that's one question. I don't quite understand sort of visually how these jigsaw pieces fit together. My next question is, the plan proposes to remove a significant amount of established canopy, and I'd like to know, how is this canopy going to be replaced and augmented? Not just for the, you know, the climate change issues, but also for the kind of privacy issues that are being infringed upon with the plan as proposed. So my next question is, how do you justify the transition from bungalows to 4.5 stories? And I have to say, I always find it a little bit disingenuous when you have a raised basement and then you start counting the stories, you know, above a basement that's half above ground and partially below ground. So I have an issue with that. And then finally, my last question is, and because I had the same issue with another development, and it's kind of a design question, but how do residents get from the underground parking into their units? So do they have to leave the underground parking, go outside, come around, and then try to get up into their unit? Or like, I just don't see, and to my mind, if that's what they have to do, that is completely impractical, particularly when you start having young families, strollers, groceries, or you know, handicap parking. You know, how is someone in a wheelchair going to get upstairs? So they're my questions in a nutshell. Thank you.
All right, any further questions or comments from council? Councillor Cadwell.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. Looking at this development, there's many concerns here, obviously, but listen to the delegations and that too, but just having the one entrance in and out off Bartlett Avenue, is that legal? I guess that's my question, because of the size of the development. So that really concerns me. So, thank you.
All right, any further questions or comments from council? I just have a couple. Just one question is on the groundwater, and it's a technical question, so it may well be answered later on. But does the groundwater change depending on the time of year? I certainly know it does in other areas of that are below or at the foot of the escarpment. So I think it really has to be looked into as to what the water table is at different times of the year if we were building underground in that type of area. And then just the questions of the tree canopy and the tree inventory. Just given the fact that I've heard tonight that it may be the wrong address, I just think a really thorough tree inventory, which does identify species at risk or potential species at risk. I think that needs to be done before. We've had areas of other developments where developers come in and clear cut or remove several trees before the tree inventory study was done, and that's just not right. And the fact that that was done is actually, quite honestly, for me, embarrassing. And that should never happen. But those are my comments for now, really. And seeing no other comments, I see, Dave, you have your hand up, so if you'd like to comment, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Jordan. And I don't intend to go through all of the questions. There are just a couple I feel I need to address this evening. Number one, the landowner is a numbered company. Unfortunately, our clients were not available to come this evening for personal matters. They will be available for the public meeting. So my apologies on their behalf for not being able to be in attendance. Number two, the sign location. We're required to put the sign on the property, and that's where we could put it. So unfortunately, we couldn't change the location. That was a location, and we had worked with staff and identifying that signage. So that's the best spot we could put the sign up. And third, just a comment on the tree protection plan, not the contents of it, but there is a typo that identifies in one section a different property, but the title page and the contents of the report all relate to 37 Bartlett Avenue. And I just wanted to clarify that and confirm that relative to the discussion. And just the other questions and comments, we've heard them this evening, so thank you for those. We'll coordinate with staff on the consolidation of all the comments, including those received by town staff and the agencies. And in particular, we will circle back with town engineering staff as it relates to the runoff and stormwater management, because I know that is something very specific that we're working with town staff to not only manage as it relates to this site, but look to improve for the broader area. So thanks for the opportunity, and we'll continue to work with town staff.
Thank you, Dave. And seeing no further questions or comments from council, thank you everyone for your participation in the open house this evening. The consultants and staff will take back your feedback. Please contact staff at planning@grimsby.ca if you have any additional comments or questions about the proposal after this evening. Good evening, everyone. The open house is now closed. Thank you and good night.